One of the games that intellectuals often play, or that psychologists and psychoanalysts often play, for obviously different reasons, is the game of word association. And I've often asked my students, if somebody would say Baal Shem Tov, Besht to you, what word would come to mind spontaneously, immediately? And of course, everybody has their answer. And I, of course, have had the opportunity to think about this answer for years, even though you're supposed to respond spontaneously. And to me, when I think of the Baal Shem Tov, the word that comes to mind immediately is love. Because that's what he was all about. He just loved. He had a capacity for loving the most unlovable human being. And my next question to my students would be, when you say the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Chabad movement, the author of the Tanya, when you say his name, what words come to mind? What word comes to mind? And again, everybody's got their answer, but to me the answer is mind. His brain was infinite. His intelligence and his intellectual integrity and his hunger for knowledge and his hunger for truth are absolutely indescribable. His whole life was the pursuit of the truth, as he could understand it intellectually and how he could live it as a Jew, faithfully and passionately. He was, of course, a disciple of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. He is the father and founder of the Chabad movement. And he's a very, very original thinker. And his contribution to the world of mysticism is inestimable. What's interesting about Rabbi Shneur Zalman is that he began to lay the groundwork for the Chabad approach to mysticism, which he would teach throughout his life, before he was a chassid. He was born to Hasidic parents, he was surrounded by Hasidic teachers and influences, but everybody who knew him was warned by the Holy Baal Shem Tov to not even mention his name to this child prodigy. The Holy Baal Shem Tov did not want Rabbi Shneur Zalman to even know him, and he succeeded at that. Rabbi Shneur Zalman was to travel to the Baal Shem Tov's successor. So though he was surrounded by so many Hasidic influences, he in fact did not get involved in the Hasidic movement until he was either 18 or 19 years old. By that point he was a master scholar and teacher with a following of great rabbis who sat at his feet and learned. And he was also a master Kabbalist. In his youth, the Kabbalah that he favored was the Kabbalah of the Shalah of Rabbi Shai Halevi Horowitz, who we mentioned a while back. And even in those early years, he began to teach Kabbalah with a philosophical form. What's so unusual about the writings of the Alter Rebbe, that are now available and published thousands and thousands of pages over many, many, many volumes, far more that was available as little as 25 or 30 years ago, reveal a method and a form to take Kabbalistic ideas, using metaphor, using analogy, using illustrations, most importantly the illustration of the human body and the human being, because we believe in the idea of nishtal shalomehem, the human being is in the image of God. So by studying the image, we can understand the prototype. By studying the human being, you can gain insight into the higher worlds. The Alter Rebbe created a mysticism which is entirely philosophical. That means it's a body of information that enlightens mystical ideas on a entirely intellectual and philosophical level. So that a person who's a non-mystic, who's not sensitive and with a greater soul, as long as he has a mind, can understand these esoteric ideas. But the Alter Rebbe went much further than simply creating a philosophical form to explain and enlighten mysticism. He actually created a unique Chassidus. Chassidus, as we all know, is an invention of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. He, in effect, was trying to provide a mystical movement for the masses and did so quite successfully in his way. And the Alter Rebbe fine-tuned and perfected these ideas of creating a way of life, a form that will allow the ordinary person to benefit from mysticism, from the inner dimension of the Torah, even if they're not mystics themselves. But the Alter Rebbe took this to its extreme. Because the Alter Rebbe would teach and say that the key to the soul is the mind. Until the Alter Rebbe, and in many other movements, this continues to this day, the key to the soul is the heart. And if you want access to your neshama, you need to ignite your heart. You need to arouse your passion. The Alter Rebbe said, no, the key to the soul is the mind. The human mind can understand, the human mind can journey, the human mind can be curious, the human mind can transcend. And the human mind can cross the bridge between the form and the formless, between what's called in the culture the sichli and the eliki, the intellectual and the godly. And as it's been brought down, the Alter Rebbe saw the cold, lifeless mind as a tool, as a vehicle for the impassioned, vibrant, living soul. And in Chabad Chassidus, there's a technique, there's a methodology of meditation and exercises that are meant to focus a person and allow him or her to get closer to spirituality, using Chabad, Chochma Bina Das, intellectual method, intellectual technique, intellectual ideas. And the entire life of the Alter Rebbe, which was an incredibly accomplished life, he did so many things, but above all else, his greatest contribution was the invention of and the development of this way of life and these teachings of Chabad Chassidus. Throughout his life, he would become more and more generous and less discriminating in whom he taught Chassidus to. By the time he passed away, he was saying discourses of Chassidus as many as twice and 3 times a week and having hundreds of people participate. He was very liberal at the end of his life in whom he invited and allowed to join into his movement. And he left us a gift which is priceless. The volume of teachings of the Alter Rebbe and Chassidus is unimaginable, and their insight and their creativity and their enlightenment is something which will live forever. I just want to tell you a number of key teachings of the Alter Rebbe that are of significance. First of all, the Alter Rebbe taught that you're never closer to God than when you're in the physical world. Chassidus Chabad underscores the idea that if your soul has been sitting in paradise for thousands of years, one day in the future, when the resurrection occurs, when Achei Temimim happens, the souls of all the great rabbis and scholars and righteous people and mystics that have been sitting in the highest heavens for millennia, basking in the glory of God, will return to be in a physical body, with the understanding that through the physical body we're closer to God than we can ever be through our soul. There is this idea that hidden within the lifeless physical material is the very essence of God himself. The theology that underscores this is beyond the scope of this immediate conversation, but nevertheless this is how he felt, that to use classic terms, that in the ego of the physical material there is the ego of the truth of God Almighty himself, and that ultimately you're never closer to God than when you're on this physical world serving God Almighty in physical ways. Another idea that I wish to mention, which is very powerful and reflects the conflict and the integrity of the Alter Rebbe's personality, is he personally was a man of incredible integrity. His life was an obsession for truth, and everything he does should be absolutely perfect. And he fought with himself to be honest to a degree which is indescribable. But he was also a teacher and a leader. And one of the final teachings, one of the very last things he taught, was the idea that when you live in this world, what matters above all else is what you do, not how sincere you are about it, not how much you feel it. His very last written document discusses the notion of chesed she'einei shalemes, a kindness which is flawed. When a person gives charity to be honored at a dinner, When a person does a favor for another person, they should get a favor back, or that they should somehow be reciprocated. And you, as a idealistic person, as a mystic, as a scholar, as a truth seeker, are disgusted and disturbed by the pettiness, by the misplaced priority. Says Alter Rebbe, no, you're wrong. This is a world of action. And what matters above all else is that we do good deeds. Even if the good deeds lack a good spirit, the good deed is tantamount, is more important than anything else. And it's so incredibly interesting that a man who in his own personal life so sought and fought that everything he do have such integrity that he should have at the very end of his life reach such a deep understanding of what truth is, that he would understand that higher than all of the inner integrity is the outer integrity. And this, of course, is something which we can all relate to. The bottom line is that we do good deeds. The bottom line is that we help one another. The intent, the meaning, the feeling behind it is incredibly important, but less important than the action itself.